Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Politics Matters podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Jakubowski, and today we'll be looking at the final returns or early returns and make my final predictions for the Georgia runoff election. So, again, not much to say here. I think we all have been following it, at least to some degree. I'll be first to admit that I haven't been following the Georgia early vote as closely as I followed the early vote in the swing states in October, but I still have been obviously looking at it, analyzing it, doing some, brief math and a few spreadsheets, and looking at what I think these numbers mean. So I want to make my opinion clear before we, get into the nuts and bolts of this race. I'm pretty sure Raphael Warnock is going to get reelected. Now, is it a sure thing? No. And I am a superstitious person. I do not like to jinx these things. I will not call him the winner or call him, say he's going to win or, blah, 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 until it is called by someone. That being said, I'm confident in him. I think he's on track to win. And at this point, I'd be pretty surprised if we get a Herschel Walker victory on Tuesday. Now, I say that because of a few things. First of all, I think the fundamental layout of this race is very advantageous to Warnock and basically any Democrat running in it. And I also think that when you look at, the demographics of the electorate that seems to be showing up, it is, even better than I think Warnock himself was expecting. So let's start by talking about runoffs in general, because this is my big thing with runoffs. This is why I was, saying that I think Walker has to win outright or he won't win at all. Runoff electorates are more educated and more concentrated in the suburbs, okay? In the past, that was really, really good for Republicans. So the most, prior to the 2021 Georgia runoff, the most recent Senate runoff in the state was in 2008, where Saxby Chambliss, who I believe was the Republican incumbent, ran against Jim Martin, a Democrat. And so in the first round, Chambliss almost got a majority. He got 49.8%, and Martin got 46.8%. So it was a 3-point split, but again, Chambliss did not crack that 50% threshold. The runoff obviously took place the following December, and we saw Saxby Chambliss win by a lot. It was 57.4% to 42.6%, and turnout was terrible, especially for the Democrats. Chambliss maintained 2/3 of the votes he got from the runoff to the general. From the general to the runoff. Martin lost basically half his votes, and what happened was turnout in the rural black areas that were strong for Democrats completely collapsed. And when looking at the county map for the first round, it's decent for Democrats, right? They won fair share of counties, whatnot. And then looking at the second round, suburbs turned blood red. The turnout in the central part of the state that was predominantly black was atrocious, and Democrats were unable to make any sort of inroads with Republicans to make up that ground, and that's why Jim Martin again lost that race. So, what changed between now and 2008? Well, evidently a lot. But what you'll notice is that in any any post-Trump era Georgia election that is not, this maybe might be a random race where I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that any high-profile, post-2016 or even including the 2016 election, that any race you'll see in Georgia, the suburbs bolted to the left. Let's just do a few kind of comparisons between 2022 and 2012. Okay. First county we're going to look at here, Cobb County. Cobb County voted for Mitt Romney by 12.5. This year, or in November, voted for Warnock by 17. Okay. Next county, let's look at Gwinnett County. This county voted for Mitt Romney by 9. It voted for Warnock by 20 this year. Let's look at Newton County. This county voted for Obama by about 2%. Newton voted for Raphael Warnock by 16%. All right. And perhaps most impressively, let's go to Henry County, which voted for Mitt Romney by 3.5. Henry voted for Warnock by 30. So, in just those, those are 4 counties I looked at, and we can look at more, by the way, and I will be looking at more later. But those 4 big Democratic-leaning suburban counties directly outside of Atlanta have grown in both black population, but also a number of white voters voting for Mitt Romney in 2012, but now regularly voting Democrat. We know a lot. I'm sure you listeners know a lot of those voters in real life. I know many of them in my life and in my family that voted Republican in 2012, but that do not feel comfortable voting for today's Republican Party, right? And most of those voters are college-educated, wealthy, or upper-class white voters in the suburbs. And those voters, again, those voters with college degrees, those voters are the voters more likely to know there's a runoff going on and are more likely to turn out in that runoff. And like I said, 2012, basically any time pre-2016, they were voting Republican, and they reelected Saxby Chambliss in 2008. But between, then and now, they have just totally switched affiliation. And that's why in the 2021 runoff, despite the fact that, historically runoff trends have benefited Republicans, because the electorate in the suburbs was so much more Democratic than it was in 2008, Ossoff beat Perdue and Warnock beat Loeffler. And again, that was just like Loeffler and Perdue were better candidates for the suburbs than Trump. We know suburbs are more Republican down ballot and that they will prefer Republican senators and governors to Trump. They still collapsed in the suburbs and, lost statewide because the share of the electorate that was from these educated Democratic-leaning voters was just so high. They couldn't overcome it. And this year, the suburbs have gotten bluer since then. Again, I think Herschel Walker is a way worse candidate for the suburbs than Kelly Loeffler or David Perdue. And that creates a very toxic environment for Georgia Republicans because they have to, overcome, their turnout problems that are now becoming clear in the rural white areas. And also they have to, make inroads in the suburbs. Because again, the hope for Republicans was that Walker would at least be able to maybe run a few points ahead of Trump and, Gwinnett, Cobb, North Fulton, Henry. And when you look at the shifts from 2020 on the New York Times map, he ran, let's just go through this. He ran 2% behind him in Cobb, 2.5% behind, or 2% behind him in Gwinnett, 2.5 or 3.5 behind him in Fayette, 9% in Henry, 5% in Clayton, and then 6% in Douglas. And so the fact that Trump did so poorly in all of these suburban counties and Walker was like, all right, I'll do you one better. And the fact that those counties are still trending left and have gotten bluer every single election, for the past 10, 15 years. So that's why I think Herschel Walker is in, really deep trouble right now. So we know the suburbs are trending blue. We know they're going to make up a higher share of the electorate. We know that's good for Warnock. But what about black voters, right? Democrats cannot win Georgia statewide without good black turnout. All right. Let's talk about the early vote then, if you want to look at black turnout. Let's see where that is at. Right now, the share of the electorate that is, and again, this will change on election day, but we have the final early vote numbers. Right now, the share of the electorate that is black stands at 32%. That is 4% higher than it was in November. So black turnout is clearly not collapsing. It's actually increasing as a share of the electorate. And white turnout's at 55%. And in November, white turnout's not at 55%. It is 55% of the electorate. And again, just going back to November, when you look at the share of the electorate that was white, it was 62% white. So white voters have fallen as a share of the electorate by 7%. And where's that decline coming from? Rural areas. Rural Georgia. This is the thing I've been saying. Republicans have traded their coalitions. The Romney coalition, which again did not win in fairness to them, but the Romney coalition turned out big for midterm elections, special elections, and runoff elections because they had college degrees. Those voters who are college educated are now voting Democrat, and that is why you have these voters still turning out, but for the other party. And now that Republicans are relying more now than ever on rural white voters turning out for them, because again, Trump was able to really milk votes out of lower propensity voters, especially in 2016. That's why he won. Those voters are not as likely to turn out in big numbers for, runoff elections or midterm elections or special elections. That's why we got a lot of Democratic-friendly results in, midterm elections, right? Like Pat Ryan won by 2 in his New York special election back in August. Obviously, some of it was persuasion, but rural Republican counties just did not turn out to the extent that Molinaro needed to win that special election. And so that's why these electorates are more friendly to Democrats now that you have the white share going down by 7% and the black share going up by 4%. Now, Does that mean that we're going to see a 32% black electorate on election day? Probably not. It's possible. Wouldn't bet on it though, because again, in 2020, the electorate that was black in early voting was, I think, 29.1%. At the end of early voting, it ended up being like just under 28% on election day. So, like, if you think black turnout's going to fall by about a point on election day, which is a reasonable assumption, it goes to 31%. Now, need I remind you of the amount that Warnock won by in 2021? He won by 2% in an electorate that was 30.4% black. So if the electorate's 31%, which is, again, half point higher than it was in 2021 when he won, he probably wins by over 2%. Do you see where I'm going with this? Warnock won by 2% isn't a lot. It's still pretty close, but it's, a comfortable enough margin that you can say, these things. Warnock won by that margin in a 30.4% black electorate, meaning that the break-even point in 2021, that runoff would have been, 28.6%, 28.7% black, right? That would have been the break-even point. So, unless you think that the electorate is falling down to 28.5 or 28 and change percent black on this runoff election day, and that white voters shift to the shift towards Walker compared to where they were in November, you cannot make a case for Walker being favored. I'll repeat that and I'll try to articulate it better this time, because I know that was a little all over the place. But again, the break-even point for Warnock in 2021 was about 28.5% black. That's what the black percentage would have had to have been for him to have a 50-50 result statewide. Again, he won 51% statewide. He won by 2 because the electorate was 2% higher, right? But again, break-even would have been 28.5%. This year, we saw 28% black electorate. So again, even lower than his break-even point last time. But because Warnock did better with white voters this time than he did last time, he was able to win more votes. Again, he didn't win the election, but he won more votes. He won a plurality of votes, despite the fact the electorate was 27.8, 27.9% black. And so, unless you think that Walker is either gaining big with voters for some reason in the past 4 weeks, which I don't think is happening clearly, or you think that the black share of the electorate is going to fall by over 4.5% on election day, which is very unlikely to happen because you need a massive white turnout, basically no black voters to show up on election day, there's no logical case for Walker being favored. Now, you can believe those things that I just listed, although, again, I think it's really clear they're not likely to happen. But other than that, there's no argument you can make for Walker being favored. And that is why I'm, feeling good about Warnock winning. It's not over. I'm not moving it to likely D or anything. But we're at the point now where I'm pretty confident saying Warnock, should win, right? Doesn't mean he will, but I think he should win based on the trends I'm seeing. Because, again, right now, this election is the highest black percentage in recent memory for Georgia Democrats. It'll probably end up being marginally higher than the January runoff from last time, which again was still a Warnock +2 electorate. So unless Republicans are making massive gains in the suburbs, which did not happen in November and will probably not happen, this random December, I don't see Walker. I don't see the case for Walker being favored. We can look at some exit polls here. I do think some of them are worth looking at for why I think Walker's in trouble here. Because again, for him to overcome a black electorate where the black share of the electorate goes up, suburban turnout is up, and rural turnout is down, he need to win over independents and moderates, right? And the thing is, when you look at the exit polls from just a month ago, he lost moderates by 34%. He lost independents by 11%. So unless Herschel has magically turned it around in the past 4 weeks, which again I don't think he has, because again, Warnock by all indications seems to have the momentum, not Herschel. That to me makes me think that he probably won't win independents unless something changes. And moderates, if he lost them by 34 just last month, I don't see why he even come close to winning them this time. And so, again, the November election, I think, was Warnock's best shot. He had to, have a big Republican turnout. He got a big Republican turnout, but it just wasn't enough for him to win because I think, again, he's not a good candidate. And that is why, ultimately, that's just ultimately why Warnock could not bring it home on election day. So, the last thing I want to talk about here, because again, I this is only 15 minutes so far. I do want to kind of talk about some interesting things that I've noticed in this race before we wrap up here. But when you look at the early vote data, the big thing that I'm noticing, obviously aside from the black vote being up, is that women are turning out at a very high rate. 56% of the electorate is female, 44% of the electorate is male, and again, you would assume that there would be some level of increased male turnout on election day. But again, families tend to vote together, meaning that if you have a family with like a husband and a wife with kids, and the husband and the wife are voting, they might they might vote on the same day, right? That's more likely than not to happen. And so the fact that women are at 54 or 56% and men are at 44% shows that I think women are just more energized than men in this election, which again, I'll pull it up right now. When you look at the November electorate, Warnock won women by 8 while he lost men by 10. So, women turning out more is a good thing for Warnock. And then when you take a look at the counties that are turning out the most, or just I guess the big counties that are worth mentioning, Fulton is obviously home to Atlanta. That's a big one for Georgia Democrats right now. Fulton is at 65% of total turnout from last time. DeKalb is even higher. It's at 76%. Gwinnett, 72%. Newton and Henry, which are the other two biggest urban counties, Newton's at 67%. Henry right now is at 68%. So again, turnout in these Democratic counties, pretty good, especially in the Atlanta area. And then to look at, I guess, in fairness, because I don't want to neglect the rest of the state, the other big counties that Warnock needs to win, Muskogee, which again is where Columbus is. It's a big non-Atlanta county. Muskogee right now, 86%. So even that's actually really high. I didn't even know it was that high, but Muskogee turned out just insane for Warnock. Again, that's a majority black county where he netted 15,000 votes last time. He netted 24,000 votes out of Richmond County, which is where Augusta is. Let's see what Richmond's doing right now. Early vote data in Richmond. Right now, 88%. So, crazy high. Chatham, finally, that's where Savannah is. It's essentially where Warnock is from. Chatham, he netted, 21,000 votes out of Chatham, another big county. Right now, 60%. So that one I think could be higher. I think you want to be above 65 percent, right? If in these counties, and I think Chatham is a bit concerning for Democrats if that's what you're looking at. But again, outweighed by the just crazy turnout again, because if turnout in say Columbus or Augusta is as high as it was in in the November election, that's just crazy, because again, it's a runoff where there would in theory be lower turnout. But again, if turnout is matching where it was last month in these Democratic counties, that's great news for Warnock, even if you might lose a couple thousand votes out of Savannah. So again, I think Savannah is a bit concerning, but again, only a couple thousand votes there, and I think they're offset easily by the great numbers you're seeing in Augusta, Columbus, and especially DeKalb. DeKalb is really good for Warnock as well. And so, at this point, Walker's playing catch up because he's down right now and he's down big. So he needs to catch up on election day. He needs to, win a lot of rural white voters. He needs to win over some Maras and independents. He needs to, hope the black turnout falls on election day, right? And the thing is that, I don't think that happens. I think Walker's going to win the election day vote, obviously, but the fact that, he had a decently high election day turnout in November and he still lost statewide by 0.9% just shows he's just not a good candidate. And I've been saying this for a while. I think Walker, with all of his scandal, because again, there are literally ads running in Georgia as we speak where Walker held a gun to his wife's head, where he his kids have spoken out against him as a parent, right? And it's really sad stuff. It's really disappointing and unfortunate to talk about, but the reality is, from a political perspective, he's not a good candidate. He's not made, he's not built to win, right? And so I think when you look at these returns in Georgia specifically, again, Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, he won big. Brian Kemp won by 8 points over Stacey Abrams in the governor's race. And yet here we are with a runoff happening between Warnock and Walker. And, Walker lost the election day vote by a point, despite the fact that Kemp was on the ballot, potentially giving him his coattails, and he still lost by a point, and he now has to go to a runoff where, again, the turnout just looks really good for his opponent and really bad for him. So I think Walker it is not over yet, but it's really hard to see him coming back from this. And again, this isn't even too surprising. Like I've been saying, runoff electorates are more Democratic, and between now and between November 8th and now early December, Warnock has been massively outspending Walker on the airwaves, just like he did the pre-election period. And I just think that Walker was never really in a position to win this race. I think he always had a chance, but I never really saw him favored, in the final months of the campaign. And so I think at this point in time, I am, I wouldn't say I'm like, not surprised by these early vote numbers, but like, yeah, if we see the election, pan out to be a moderately sized Warnock victory, or, say he wins by 4, which would again be the largest margin for any Georgia Democrat federally since, this millennium, or since, the beginning of 2000s, right? That would just be really, really impressive. And I think it would just go to show runoff elections are really hard for Republicans to win nowadays due to the new coalitions. And I think also Walker, not a good candidate. So right now, I don't think Warnock wins by 4, but I think he wins by 2.5, 3 maybe. I'll be releasing a county by county prediction on YouTube. I'll be doing a bit more of this. That'll come out on Tuesday morning, the morning of the election. But yeah, right now I'm pretty confident that Warnock will win. I think Walker, I think at this point, Warnock has a 70-75% chance. I wouldn't be stunned if it's close. I think it could easily, be a little closer than people think, because a lot of people seem to think Warnock's going to win by like 6 or 7, which I don't think is super realistic. But yeah, Warnock, I think will win, and I think, I'll take him by somewhere in between 2.5 and 3. So 2.78 or 2.9 or whatever, the margin will end up being somewhere in that ballpark. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel. If you're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, share it with a friend. Go follow me on Twitter. You can yell at me if you disagree. If you think Walker's going to win, do go yell at me on Twitter. I'm at Ryan Jakubowski. You can go read my writing at uapyt.substack.com. And with all of that said, thank you for listening. If you live in Georgia, be sure to vote if you haven't already. And if not, and also if you live in Georgia, but specifically to people who are not, in Georgia, and everyone listening, have a great rest of your day, guys. And I'll see you all next week to analyze the result of this election.